Chapter 281. 281. Nick kept looking at the empty containment unit for a while. This was the only containment unit on the map that could possibly house their adult. Nick thought, all other containment units are either occupied by weaker specters or are empty. Additionally, this is a very expensive containment unit, and they wouldn't just keep it empty like this. That's a waste of an investment. Is there truly nothing in there? Nick decided to check and moved around the ceiling for a bit. Sure enough, I don't hear any hum from the electronics. Nick thought, the containment unit isn't even on. Does that mean that their adult is somewhere else? Nah, as far as I can see, the map makes sense, and there are no suspicious empty spaces. Additionally, why would you want to keep your strongest specter this secret? Sure, you don't want others to know about it, but you don't even want your team leaders to know? That's strange. Also, why was this containment unit marked red on the map? At that moment, Nick became suspicious. Do they even have an adult? Based on what Winter said, the Spartans were originally a group of 3 veterans that left Kugelblitz to create their own business. They quickly managed to get a couple of adolescents and newbies, but for several years they couldn't get an adult. And then, about half a year ago, they announced that they had caught an adult. But did they? I've never heard any details about this adult. Yet, the power of the leaders increased. John Keyweather even demonstrated his power as a mid-veteran. They shouldn't be able to do that without an adult. If Nick were corporeal, he would be furrowing his brows right about now. Something is going on, Nick thought. As far as I can see, there is no adult in any of the containment units, but the powers of the veterans still increased. But that's impossible without an adult. Suddenly, Nick had a revelation. But what if they do have one? What if it's just not inside any containment unit? What if it is walking around, disguised as a normal human? Obviously, the Spartans have been contacted by one of Envy's servants. Otherwise, the ambush wouldn't have happened. Assuming the servant contacted them 6 to 12 months ago, it would make sense that they announced they finally caught an adult. I'm not sure if the servant is bribing, controlling, blackmailing, or trading with them, but one thing is clear. The servant is increasing the overall power of the veterans. However, working together with a specter like this is about as illegal as it gets, and if anyone finds out, they will all be killed. Because of that, they have to keep everything secret, and they're telling their team leaders and normal extractors that they caught an adult. To make it believable, they said that their most expensive containment unit, this one, is housing the specter, but they're not giving them any details. That would explain why the team leader marked this containment unit red, while he didn't mark any of the other empty containment units. He thinks that an adult is contained here, but there isn't. So, where is the adult? Among the employees. Nick didn't like that thought one bit. This meant that a venomous snake was hiding in a bunch of harmless snakes. If Nick grabbed the wrong one eventually, Nick turned around and went back into the light layer above the hallway. Yes, there was a dangerous specter amongst the enemies, but he still couldn't just leave. Additionally, Nick only needed to be careful. It was possible that the specter wasn't really among the employees, but just some kind of visitor or external consultant eventually. Nick stopped above one of the offices, but this one was different from the previous one. This one was occupied. A beautiful blonde woman was sitting inside her office, writing something on a sheet of paper. Based on the size and the look of the office, Nick could tell that she was another team leader. Nick's smoke body stopped above her head and created a circle. His message was clear. The gray room moved towards the place and waited. Nick moved to the side. Silence. Bang. The gray room cut through the floor and pushed itself downward by jumping off the ceiling. The woman became startled, but before she could even look around, the gray room landed on her head. Her barrier wasn't active. Even though these barriers were expensive, the slight drain of Zephix could still annoy a couple of people. Most of them kept their barriers active and just dealt with the annoying feeling, but some of them, especially when they felt safe, deactivated their barriers. And well, this team leader was sitting inside her office. There was probably no safer location from her perspective. As soon as the gray room landed on her head, her eyes became unfocused and she fell forward, her head hitting the table. Nick came through the hole and materialized. Looking at the team leader, she didn't move, yet she was still alive. Even more, she didn't seem injured. It was all too clear to Nick that the gray room was feeding. Nick wasn't sure how the gray room fed, But the team leader's state was too abnormal right now. Nick furrowed his brows, grabbed her neck, and broke it. "We're here to kill. I told you that I would let you escape the building, but in exchange, you have to help me," he said. The gray room didn't move for a while, but eventually it went back to the walls. It didn't communicate in any way. The next moment, Nick looked at the dead team leader. This should be the third one. The first one should have been the guy with the yellow barrier during my ambush. He was the only one with a yellow one, while everyone else had orange ones. I didn't originally pay the color any mind, but the supervisor I killed near the trading post earlier also had a yellow one. He was probably also a team leader. So she should be the third. I don't know how many teams the Spartans have, but I'm sure almost all of their team leaders are dead. Chapter 282. 282. It was quite funny that the Spartans used to have around 30 Johns, but even though Nick had not even killed half of them, he had most likely gotten all or most of the team leaders. Nick looked around the office for a bit and gathered a couple of documents that seemed important. "All right," Nick said to the gray room, "let me check how the outside looks. I'll be back soon." Then, Nick turned into smoke and entered the light layer again. About half a minute later, he returned. "I know what we're going to do," he said. "First, we need to clear the hallway. One of the extractors is currently walking to one of the offices here. You can take care of him." Nick grabbed the glove on the right hand of the dead team leader and put it over his right arm, stuffing the old glove into the pockets of the corpse. Then, Nick opened the door with the glove. Lastly, Nick pointed down the hallway. "Down there, he should round the corner soon." "I'll check the other side," Nick said. The gray room quickly scrambled through the open door and ran down the corridor. Before waiting near the edge, Nick looked towards the other side, keeping watch over all the doors. If even one of them opened, he would kill whoever walked out. CRRRR. Nick turned around and saw the gray room spinning on top of the orange barrier of the person who had just rounded the corner. An instant later, the barrier broke and the gray room landed on the guy's head. Nick nodded, went back into the office, grabbed the corpse, came out and walked over to the gray room. "You can stay on him for a bit longer," Nick said as he lifted the living body with the gray room still on top of it. The reason why Nick didn't immediately kill the corpse was that he didn't want to make a mess. A blood splatter in the hallway would give his presence away immediately. Nick looked around the corner and saw an empty hallway. Then he silently charged down the hallway, opened the door, charged down another hallway, opened another door, went through the guard room, opened yet another door, went down the stairs, ran down another corridor, and opened the last door. "Oh, that looks good," the rat shouted with excitement. Naturally, Nick had brought the two corpses to the parasite. Every corpse was valuable. A peak John was worth 50 normal corpses. Nick broke the neck of the living body and threw it forward. The gray room jumped away from the corpse and landed on the wall. The rat looked with interest at the little gray specter. "Oh, you found a friend," it commented. Nick glanced at the motionless gray room and pointed at the exit. "Later, when we're done, you can escape through here. This leads into the sewers. However, I have to remind you that you should keep to our promise. For now, you still have to help me," Nick said. The rat grinned. With a helper, Nick would bring more corpses. "Yeah, you should listen to him," the rat told the gray specter. "He's pretty honest, and he's never broken a promise. If he said he'll let you go, he will do just that. Also, you shouldn't anger him. He's much more dangerous than he seems." The gray room didn't say anything but slowly walked back towards the entrance. Its intentions were clear. "Good," Nick said before running out of the room again with the gray room. When the lights turned off, the rat looked at the two corpses. "Today is a good day." Meanwhile, Nick and the gray room ran down the hallway again. On their way, Nick told the gray room about his plan, and the next moment, the gray room seemingly vanished. Nick stealthily rounded a couple of corners until he stood beside a door. Compared to most other doors, this one was made of metal. Instead of breaking into the room, Nick just waited beside the door. Crash. Suddenly, the sound of metal being destroyed came from behind the door. A specter. The alarm. Run. Many different voices came from behind the door. Suddenly, the door opened. Bang. Nick killed the person who was running out and smoothly pulled the corpse into the room behind him. 7 people were inside the room, and a couple of them were blindly running towards Nick without even looking at him. Right now, their attention was focused on the other end of the room. The gray room had broken through the ceiling, landed on top of someone's head, and waited there, and it just so happened to be directly beside the alarm. The people in this room were clothed in tactical gear. They were not extractors but guards. Naturally, the guards knew that they couldn't possibly fight against a specter, which was why their first instinct was to ring the alarm and run away. Sadly, none of them dared to reach for the alarm. Instead, they ran outside, right into Nick's arms. Nick killed all of them in less than 5 seconds. Naturally, this was the gathering place for most of the guards. When they were not currently patrolling, they were in here, resting. These people were the biggest obstacle for Nick in his mission. After all, if a guard noticed that several people were missing while going on their tour, they would sound the alarm. Nick quickly gathered all of the corpses. Luckily, he had killed them very carefully so that they didn't lose any blood. After a bit of improvisation, Nick had essentially knotted parts of their clothing together, creating a small rope with which he could pull the entire pile. Then, Nick slowly exited the room and carefully made his way down the hallway. But then, one of the doors on the side of the hallway opened and an extractor walked out. Nick stopped. He was over 30 meters away from the person and he was pulling a huge pile of corpses behind him. This was problematic. Chapter 283. 283. Nick didn't have any of his spears or fist weapons with him since they could identify him, which meant that he didn't have a ranged weapon. Nick had to make a decision. There was no time for hesitation. Without thinking, he grabbed the gray spider to his right and threw it at the extractor. The extractor barely turned to Nick before her vision was filled with the gray specter. The next moment, an orange barrier appeared around her. CRK. Yet, the gray room started to spin and broke the barrier. When the extractor lost all her Zephix, she lost her power and collapsed. The gray room landed on her, walked up to her head, and plopped down on it. Nick released a sigh of relief. Sorry, he said. I had to act quickly. The gray room didn't answer and just kept sitting on top of the unconscious extractor's head. Nick guessed that the gray room didn't have any complaints. After putting the woman on top of the pile, Nick continued running towards the exit. Oh, that looks nice, the parasite said as he saw Nick entering the room with 8 corpses. Sorry, time's up, Nick said as he killed the extractor naturally. Nick was speaking to the gray room since it had still been feeding on the extractor. He quickly dumped all the corpses in the hole and heard a cacophony of splashes and crunching noises coming from the sewers. Man, I knew it was the right decision to accept this deal, the parasite said after Nick left the room again. This city is quickly becoming one of my best hunting grounds. Nick and the gray room quickly reached the central hallways again. On their way, they found a person cleaning the hallway. Got no time. Can't get found out. Nick quickly killed the cleaning lady and carried her corpse with him. After that, Nick decided to clean the hallways of all the people cleaning right now and gathered 2 more corpses. He delivered the 3 corpses to the parasite and went back inside. A moment later, Nick decided to kill most of the clerks in their offices. What if one of them was searching for someone? In the next 10 minutes, Nick killed around 15 clerks and delivered them to the parasite. By now, Nick had killed 15 clerks, 7 guards, 3 cleaning people, and 6 extractors. The more people Nick killed, the more he thought about the ambush from yesterday. These people all wanted to kill him, and this was what they deserved. Nick had been inside the Spartans building for over 30 minutes now. Eventually, Nick cleared out most of the offices. The only offices remaining were those of the executives, and Nick specifically avoided those. If he attacked a veteran, he would most likely get found out. Another area that Nick had avoided was the 2 entrances to the building. There were bound to be several people there. All right, Nick said to the gray room. Change of plans. Nick took out the map and looked at it for a bit. Then, he walked towards one of the doors and opened it. This door was quite a bit thicker than the others, and Nick found himself in a small room with another door after that. He fidgeted with a console for a bit and opened the other door. An absolutely terrifying and ear-grating screech reverberated throughout the entire room. Nick felt like his heart stopped. He had just opened the door to a containment unit. In the corner of the room was a hysteric but beautiful woman, and she was shouting in absolute terror at the top of her lungs. That's why she's called the Screamer. Nick thought. There was also a young woman sitting in the corner with a very uncomfortable and stressed expression. She was an extractor, and based on her uniform, she was a newbie. Funnily enough, she was so focused on resisting the screaming that she didn't even notice that the door opened. Nick ran into the containment unit and killed the extractor. The specter just kept screaming, "Hey, can you hear me?" Nick shouted at the screamer, his voice getting droned out by the high-pitched screams. The specter just kept screaming, "If you're sentient, you need to tell me. Otherwise, I'm going to kill you." More screaming. It was like the specter was completely beside herself in panic. "All right then," Nick shouted. Bang. The screamer's shout stopped as Nick punched her in the face. Then, Nick grabbed her head and tore it into pieces. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered onto the walls and floor of the containment unit. To make sure that the specter was truly dead, Nick tore her into multiple pieces. Specters were very resilient. When Nick was certain that the specter was dead, he released a sigh. the first specter I ever killed," he thought as he looked at the gory pieces. Naturally, Nick's goal was to damage the Spartans as much as possible, and besides killing their employees, getting rid of their specters was the next best thing. Nick had already taken their old primary specter, the Grey Room, with him, and now he had killed one of their specters. Nick left the pieces of the specter inside the containment unit and left with the extractor's corpse. Luckily, the outer doors were soundproof, which meant that nobody in the building heard the specter. However, that couldn't really be considered luck since every manufacturer would isolate this specter with a soundproof wall, startling the entire building every time someone entered the containment unit was not the nicest thing to do. Nick closed the door to the containment unit and turned to the Grey Room, which was waiting on the wall, not sentient, Nick said before the two of them exited. After delivering the corpse, Nick went to the next containment unit with the team leader's card. It wasn't difficult to enter all of the containment units. Nick would make sure that the Spartans regretted attacking him. Chapter 284. 284. When Nick entered the next containment unit, he wasn't surprised to see a big fleshy worm. However, he was surprised to see two people looking at him inside the containment unit. Nick just looked back, stepped forward, and closed the entrance behind him. The two of them were newbies, and they had been working with the bloodworm. Naturally, Nick killed the two of them quickly and then tore the bloodworm apart. No descendants of the blood ancestor were sentient, and any non-sentient specter would be killed by Nick. After killing the specter, Nick delivered the two corpses to the parasite. Then, Nick entered the next containment unit. This time, he found half a torso in the containment unit. The torso belonged to a man, and he just glanced at Nick emotionlessly without saying anything. When he saw Nick's get up, he raised an eyebrow, but he didn't say anything. This specter was called the Agonizing Weight, and Nick hadn't expected to find a humanoid specter in here. The name didn't sound very human. "Hey, you're sentient, right?" Nick asked. The man just looked at Nick. "You better answer, or I'm going to kill you," Nick said. The specter didn't answer. "Alrighty then," Nick said. Boom. Nick exploded forward. CRRKK. Nick's nails hit the wall as the torso threw itself to the side with its arms. "I didn't think you were serious," the torso said with narrowed eyes, not seeming very perturbed. "What's this about?" "So, you were sentient," Nick commented. "I am," the Agonizing Weight said. "Good," Nick said with a nod. "I'm not part of these people. In fact, I'm their enemy and I want to cause them as much damage as possible. I killed a couple of their non-sentient specters already. As for the sentient ones, I'm offering a trade. A bit of your help for your freedom. You're not the first one joining me." The Agonizing Weight looked at Nick with furrowed brows. "Fine, I'll come with you," he said. "However, I don't know how you're going to get me out of here." Nick pointed at the light window on the ceiling. "If this is anything like the other containment units, I can create a 30-centimeter wide hole without sounding the alarm. If we get rid of one of your arms, we can get you through it." The Agonizing Weight still seemed suspicious. "All right, make the hole," he said. Nick nodded. "Give me a second." Then, Nick left the containment unit, closed the door, and went to the other side of the light shaft by traveling through the light layer as fog. When he arrived, Nick created a hole at the side first and dug through a layer of metal, which eventually led to the hallway. Nick hadn't done this with the Grey Room since such a hole would be noticeable, but since there were now not as many people walking around, he decided to take the risk. Additionally, he was nearly done here. When he was done, Nick entered the light shaft again and dug a hole in the window. "All right, can you fit through this hole without damaging the window? If you damage it, the alarm will go off," Nick said. The Agonizing Weight looked at the hole for a bit, then he tore one of his arms off, including the shoulder. A moment later, he tossed the arm through the hole before throwing himself through it with the other arm. From the small tunnel leading to the hallway, Nick watched the Agonizing Weight reattaching his arm. The two of them went back to the hallway. When the Agonizing Weight reached the hallway, he looked at the gray spider beside him with a neutral expression. Nick looked at the big hole he had made and became nervous. "If anyone walks through here, they will immediately notice," Nick thought. "We don't have any time left." Then, Nick turned in a specific direction. "Time for the finale," he said. "After you two help me with this one, you can leave through the hole. The Grey Room knows where it is," Nick said to the Agonizing Weight. The Agonizing Weight didn't answer. The next moment, the three of them ran down the hallway. When Nick reached a specific containment unit, he stopped and looked at it, just as expected. He thought when he saw the huge and complex console controlling the containment unit, Nick knew that model since the fog was contained in the same one. A moment later, Nick cut through the walls at a specific place. Behind the wall was a panel with a lightning bolt on it. This was the central storage for the Zephix operating the special containment unit. Containment units capable of suppressing force specters required a constant supply of Zephix to work, and this panel was hiding that supply. Nick carefully cut through the panel and saw 4 vials, 2 white, one half-white and one clear. The white ones were filled to the brim with Zephyx, and every vial could hold 1 kilo of Zephyx. This meant that Nick had 2.5 kilos of Zephyx in front of him. Nick grinned, yet, the next moment, he stepped away. "We'll free our friend later," Nick said to the 2 other specters. "We have to do something else first." Then, Nick led the 3 of them down the hallway and stopped in front of a couple of offices. "Go check if he's still in there," Nick told the gray room. The gray room went up the wall and dug into the light layer. Since the time for the finale was here, there was no longer any need to be stealthy. A couple seconds later, the gray room crawled out again and scratched a bit with its right leg. Nick grinned. "I need you 2 in this fight. You don't need to kill him, you just need to distract him." "Who's in there?" the agonizing wait asked. "John Keyweather," Nick said, "the CEO. And he's a mid-veteran." The next moment, Nick took a black ball out of his pockets. He looked at the 2 specters, which were waiting close by. Bang. Nick kicked the door open and threw the ball to the ground. WHOOM. A cloud of black smoke exploded out of the ball. Chapter 285. 285. The gray room charged into the room by crawling along the wall. The agonizing weight threw itself in as well. "What?" Nick heard a shocked shout coming from inside the room. Nick immediately turned into black smoke and joined the other black smoke in the surroundings. For the first time in a while, Nick's ability activated again as he slithered across the walls. He heard the sound of things crashing. Ding. Nick's eyes narrowed when he saw a green flash. In an instant, Nick turned corporeal and jumped forward with all of his power. Bang. Nick's metallic nails hit John Keyweather's green barrier, and another green flash appeared. Meanwhile, a middle-aged man with black hair looked with terror at the black figure that had just appeared in his sight. He had just lost over 40 of his Zephyx with that attack. Even more, the appearance of this black figure was terrifying. It was like it was some kind of servant of death itself, and the black nails were extremely frightening and powerful. Was this a specter? Shing. A white shield manifested in John's left arm, and he moved it toward the black figure with all of his power, yet, just before he hit the black figure, it seemed to disappear like smoke. Ding. John's barrier activated again, and he saw the gray room attacking it from above again. How the fuck did those 2 break out? What is that third specter? John thought in frustration, rage, and terror. John jumped to the side and used his shield to slap the gray room to the side. The gray room was one of their most important specters, and even though it was attacking him right now, he didn't want to kill it. Then, John saw a hand clawing at his barrier, which activated again. Bang. John kicked the agonizing weight to the side. BOOM. The black figure appeared again, its black nails brutally tearing at his barrier. John's face turned white as he felt himself running low on Zephyx. "I have to flee." John attacked the figure with his spear, but the figure just vanished again. Then he turned to his right and punched the wall. Boom. The wall exploded, and the hallway was covered with pieces of metal and steel. Then, John immediately ran out. He left the smoke cloud and saw the agonizing weight and the gray room running down the hallway in front of him. "They're running away?" John thought in shock. Why were they running away? Bang. John's green barrier appeared again, but the next moment, it broke into pieces under his shocked gaze. He couldn't see it, but right now, a black figure was behind him, and it had just left the black cloud of smoke behind them. The black figure's nails stretched towards John's head, and then they engulfed its arcade. The nails dug into John's eyes, crushing them. Then, the nails rammed into his brain and violently moved around. The nails tore out by tearing the socket apart before finally burying into John's head with one final attack. John was dead. The CEO of the Spartans had died at this moment. 2 people ran out of an office in front of John. They were the 2 other founding members of the Spartans, and what they saw terrified them to the core. A completely black figure with terrifying nails was on top of their friend. The figure's head turned forward, and for just an instant, time seemed to stand still as the 2 sides looked at each other. Then, the black figure violently pulled the corpse back into the black cloud. "John!" Callum shouted as he and his friend charged into the cloud of smoke. Callum quickly found John's corpse inside the black cloud and looked at it. Since John's head had faced the ground earlier, Callum hadn't seen the true extent of the damage. When Callum saw the ravaged head of his friend, he felt like the world was ending. This was his friend. They had been best friends for decades. The next moment, a terrifyingly loud alarm echoed throughout the building. The 3rd founder had activated the alarm as he searched through the black cloud for the black figure. More and more people came out of the rooms at the side. Suddenly, a second alarm joined the first alarm. When Callum and his friend heard that alarm, their eyes widened in horror. No, this was the alarm of the containment unit suppressing the Crimson Sea malfunctioning. Moments later, the walls of a certain containment unit started to bleed, and the blood rapidly covered the floor around the containment unit. The people in the hallways looked with shock as a wave of blood gathered in the hallway before thundering towards them. Everyone started to flee in horror, but the wave still caught many of them. As soon as they were touched by the wave, they started to smoke. This was acid. The normal people dissolved within 10 seconds, while the others took much longer to dissolve. The Peak Johns managed to run away from the water, but the newbies weren't as lucky. More and more red water filled the hallways. Boom! Eventually, the two entrances of the building exploded outward as they couldn't resist the pressure of the red water. In the inner and outer cities, the bystanders looked with shock at the entrances. And then, they also got engulfed by the red water. There was more and more red water. It just didn't stop. The guards quickly noticed and rang the city's emergency alert. Meanwhile, a black figure thundered through a door before closing the door behind it. "No corpses?" the rat asked. But before it could finish asking, Nick already jumped through the hole. The rat raised an eyebrow, but a moment later, the door broke down, and a wave of red acid covered the room. "Oh, fuck," the rat said before it was engulfed by the acid. The rat died almost immediately, and the red water entered the hole, flowing into the sewers. Chapter 286. 286 A huge barrier appeared inside the inner city. Surprisingly, it was only surrounding the Spartans' building. The barrier was created by an expert working for the city guards. Right now, the expert was holding a huge machine in his hands, and he was pointing it at the Crimson Sea. The machine resonated with the megastructure that was the city, and the barrier extended towards the walls of the megastructure, completely isolating the Crimson Sea. Naturally, Crimson Fungus City had ways to deal with force specters, and this kind of barrier was one of these ways. Bang! The Crimson Sea hit the barrier and was stopped by it. "Help!" one of the newbies from the Spartans shouted as she hammered on the barrier. By now, many parts of her skin had turned red, and on other parts, there wasn't even any skin left. The Crimson Sea was completely devouring her. More and more guards appeared behind the huge barrier. The reactions of the guards were mixed. Some of them got excited since one of their competitors was getting fucked, but some just felt sad and terrible. When they looked around, they could see that the Crimson Sea had already extended over 100 meters into the inner city. Quite a few houses had been engulfed, and by now, the citizens in said houses were already dead. 3 more newbies came out from the Crimson Sea and started to bang on the barrier. "Follow protocol," one of the experts shouted to the guards. The guards took deep breaths. 3 of them jumped up and landed on the slanted barrier. Then, they took out long rifles and pointed them at the barrier. Surprisingly, the barrier allowed the rifles to enter. The newbies realized what was about to happen, and their terror intensified. Bang! 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 2 of the newbies exploded in a shower of blood, leaving 2 more. The others were waiting for their deaths, but surprisingly, the guards didn't shoot at them. Bang! One of the guards shot at the building, leaving a huge hole behind in the wall at a height of about 10 meters. "Jump in there if you want to live," one of the guards shouted. The newbies didn't hesitate and immediately started climbing. The reason why these 2 newbies were left alive was because their barriers were still active, which meant that they hadn't been touched by the Spectre. When a breach occurred, it was protocol to kill every person who came into direct contact with any Spectre. The 2 newbies managed to climb into the hole, and they no longer were inside the Crimson Sea. Yet, the Crimson Sea continued expanding and rising. The guards looked with narrowed eyes at the growing Spectre. Naturally, the Crimson Sea wasn't endless. It had a finite size and couldn't just grow like that. The reason why the amount of water was increasing was its food. If one wanted, one could categorize specters into 2 kinds: specters whose growth was limited by time, and specters whose growth was limited by food. The dreamer was a specter whose growth was limited by time. This meant that it could only eat so much food in a given time frame, which meant that it couldn't just suddenly explode in power. In contrast, the dung heap was a specter whose growth was limited by food. If 10,000 tons of fresh food were dumped onto the dung heap, it might immediately advance to becoming an adult, and that growth wouldn't stop anytime soon. If one dumped a planet of food onto the dung heap, it might ascend to becoming an eternal very quickly. The Crimson Sea was one of these kinds of specters. When it had broken out of its containment unit, it had consumed several clerks, cleaning people, guards, and even Zephix extractors. And unfortunately, the Crimson Sea became more powerful by killing people. Right now, there were still a few Zephix extractors remaining inside the building, and they were surrounded by the Crimson Sea. The normal people were already all dead. If a newbie were Still inside the building, they would have already run out of Zephyx. After killing the normal people, the Crimson Sea advanced to becoming a peak adolescent, which increased its power and size. The Crimson Sea's acid was growing in power. And even the few Johns still inside the building felt their barriers getting weaker rapidly. Splash. A John jumped out of the Crimson Sea, but he hit the huge barrier. Bang. His head vanished as one of the guards killed the John. His barrier had already been deactivated. Killing the John assured that the Crimson Sea didn't gain anything from this kill. The newbies high on the wall looked with horror as the Crimson Sea came closer and closer to their location. Suddenly, some red mist started to rise from the Crimson Sea. The newbies looked with shock at the red mist. What was happening now? The guards on the outside narrowed their eyes. They realized what this meant. The red mist entered the hole in which the two newbies were. My Zephyx is falling. One of them shouted, mine too. The other one shouted, BOM. At that moment, a new hole appeared at a height of about 30 meters, and an instant later, two figures jumped out from it. They were the two remaining founders of the Spartans. Callum Sonder extended an emblem towards the barrier covering the building, and a moment later, a hole appeared inside the barrier. Callum Sonder and his friend flew through the hole, and the barrier closed behind them, naturally. Both of them had already worked for the city once, and both of them had some common equipment used by the guards. These kinds of emblems were used to get past these kinds of barriers. These barriers were meant to isolate dangerous specters and to keep them in place. While the specters were suppressed, extractors would go in to deal with them. Callum Sonder and his friend landed outside the barrier, but before they could release a sigh, several guards appeared in front of them, Shing. And then another person appeared in front of the guards who looked at Callum Sonder. Congratulations, the governor said with an unamused voice before gesturing to the Crimson Sea, which was still releasing red mist. You have another adult now. Chapter 287. 287 The Crimson Sea was not a sentient specter, which meant that it hadn't kept its ability to produce acidic red mist a secret, and since the red mist hadn't been there since the beginning, it meant that the Crimson Sea hadn't had the ability to create the red mist before. Specters generally only gained new abilities when they advanced a level. The Crimson Sea had become an adult. Sir, this is not our fault. Callum Sonder immediately shouted with helpless frustration. Someone sabotaged us. I don't care about that right now, the governor said with a solemn tone. I want to know the status inside the building. Callum took a deep breath. The entire building is covered by the Crimson Sea, Callum explained. We dug through the megastructure to get here. Everything below the hole is lost. What about the containment units? The governor asked. Can the Crimson Sea corrode containment units? Callum grimaced. That was all the governor needed to see. I want Teresa and Stark to stay on standby near the other exit. The governor told one of the guards, I don't want any surprises to happen. They are to kill every specter that they see. I don't care about the potential lost profits. Sir, one of the guards shouted with a salute before jumping away to inform Teresa and Stark. Then, the governor turned back to look at the Crimson Sea. How many of your people died? He asked Callum without looking at him. Callum looked at his friend for a bit. And the two of them conferred for a bit. We don't have the specific numbers, but it should be something like 15 to 20 level 1 extractors, 10 to 15 level 2 extractors, between 30 and 50 normal people, and John Keyweather. Callum said with a heavy tone. The governor furrowed his brows. John Keyweather died? How? It was the saboteur, Callum said. It was a human, completely covered by black cloth. I saw them killing John with my own eyes. The governor continued looking at the building as he kept thinking about some things. By now, the two newbies had died in the red mist, and the Crimson Sea expanded a bit more, but then it stopped expanding. It had already killed everything inside the building. A huge crowd of people had gathered, and among them were the employees from the Spartans who hadn't been on duty. They just looked with horror and shock at their workplace, which was now being submerged in red acid. If they had been on duty, the thought was terrifying. Sir, the two majors are in place. A guard told the governor. The governor nodded. Start the suppression. The governor ordered. The guards answered with a collective shout, and the next moment, several experts gathered near the machine that created the barrier on the other side of the megastructure. The same thing happened. Naturally, someone had also created a barrier on that side. The next moment, all the guards started to push forward. As they advanced, the barrier shrunk. From a radius of 100 meters, it shrunk to 90 meters. Over the next minutes, the barrier shrank to a radius of 30 meters. Surprisingly, the steel that had been submerged in the Crimson Sea didn't show any kind of rust or damage. In fact, it looked like it had been cleaned naturally. Since the Crimson Sea was a specter, its acid wasn't the same as traditional acid. When the barrier reached its current size, its speed of shrinking slowed down. That was because there was now no more air left inside the building and the barrier. Everything was covered by the Crimson Sea. Start extermination, the governor commanded. The guards answered and took out several big contraptions that looked like gigantic machine guns. A moment later, they put the heads of the contraptions through the barrier, and moments later, the heads began to spin. Ready. 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 The governor noted that everyone was ready. Fire. Bang. An explosion of blue lightning came out of each of the contraptions, each destroying several meters of water. An instant later, the barrier shrunk by about a meter. The guards using the contraptions let go and stepped back. The power source that the contraptions used was their own Zephyx. Other guards approached the contraptions and pushed them into the barrier again. Ready. 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 Fire. Bang. More water was destroyed and the barrier shrunk even more. After a couple of minutes, the barriers tightly encased the building in the wall of the megastructure. The Crimson Sea was now contained within the Spartans' building. Is there access to the sewers inside the building? The governor asked without looking away from it. No, sir, Callum answered. The governor nodded. That means things aren't as bad as they initially seemed. Then the governor turned to one of his guards. Have there been sightings of any specters on the other side? I will check, sir, the guard said before he ran towards the outer city. After that, the governor turned to the guards near the barrier again. Secure the barrier and expand it. I don't want any holes to suddenly appear outside the barrier. Several guards left to do just that. For the next couple of minutes, not much happened since everyone was busy preparing for the push into the building. The barrier couldn't extend through solid matter, which was why the barrier had to be manipulated and reshaped with a lot of work. Julius. The governor turned to his right and saw an older man looking at the device creating the barrier. Yes, George, the governor asked. It was George Meander, aka Ghosty. Apparently, he had also come here even though he wasn't working for the city guards. The Zephyx consumption of the barrier has increased, Ghosty said. That's to be expected, the governor answered. The barrier is smaller and the Crimson Sea's power is more concentrated. I know, Ghosty answered with furrowed brows. I took these aspects into account. I meant that the consumption of Zephyx has increased suspiciously much, even after considering all of this. The governor looked at the red entrance of the building. Maybe a specter is attacking the barrier from within the Crimson Sea. Maybe, Ghosty answered, or the Crimson Sea advanced to being an early adult. Chapter 288. 288. Maybe there was a level 2 extractor that managed to survive until now, the governor said. Could be, Ghosty said. A minute of silence passed before another guard told the governor that everyone was ready. Additionally, a second guard told the governor that the other side had not encountered any specters yet. That means the Crimson Sea probably hasn't eaten through the containment units yet, the governor said before turning to his guards. Start. 9 guards were standing very close together at the entrance of the building. One of them was holding a smaller version of the big machine creating the barrier, for others were holding small plates connected to the machine. The remaining 4 pushed the contraptions that released the blue lightning through the barrier. Boom! The blue lightning exploded, clearing several meters of water. Simultaneously, the other 5 people jumped forward. The barrier morphed and changed shape. It adhered to the walls on the inside of the building before expanding again. The guards had created a bubble inside the building that was about 2 meters in diameter. Boom. More blue lightning and the bubble expanded to the side. The protocol was to cover the walls of the building in the barrier first before pushing into the middle of the rooms. A couple minutes later, the entire inside of the building's entrance was free of water and covered by a thin film of the barrier. Occasionally, the guards looked at the bright red wall in front of them. It was like half of the big hallway was clean and bright while the other half had been devoured by a domain of red. Sadly, the guards didn't have the time to admire the endless red in front of them. The governor looked at the entrance. Things were under control, sir, an expert said as he arrived beside the governor. The other side reports an increase of Zephyx expenditure that seems unanticipated. The governor furrowed his brows. Not only their side, Ghosty said before the governor could say anything. The governor looked at Ghosty. Ours as well. Ghosty nodded as he fidgeted with a couple of devices. Earlier, the Zephyx expenditure was twice as high as expected. Now, it's almost 3 times as high, Ghosty said. Either something is malfunctioning, more specters are attacking the barrier, or the Crimson Sea advanced to become a mid-adult, Ghosty explained. The governor became a bit worried. I presume we can still deal with the expenditure? Absolutely, Ghosty said before the relevant guard could report. It needs to be about 10 times higher to become an issue. The governor nodded. Then things are still under control. The Crimson Sea should become weaker the more we advance. By now, the guards had cleared the entire entrance and they were reaching the first hallways already. The same was true for the other side as well. It increased again. Ghosty suddenly said, his voice no longer as calm. Again, the the governor asked with worry. Ghosty nodded. It's now nearly 4 times as high as expected. You should call more dash. The governor looked at Ghosty, who just raised his eyebrows in shock. It increased again. Ghosty said. Now, there was definite worry in his voice. The governor turned to his personal guards. Emergency alert. Gather all available experts. Get Arya here, he shouted. It increased again. Ghosty shouted. Then he charged to the entrance and grabbed the big contraption, with a powerful specialist controlling the contraption. Now, the resistance of the barrier increased tremendously. Teresa or Stark have to support the barrier on their side. The governor shouted. Several guards immediately ran towards the outer city to inform them. The next moment, the governor looked at the building with narrowed eyes. Shing. Suddenly, the governor vanished. Bang. A huge amount of red water was vaporized as an intense explosion of fire appeared inside the building. Ghosty, who was carrying the contraption, immediately ran into the building, the barrier adapting to his movements and stretching further in. They had to get rid of the Crimson Sea. Ha 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 ha. Silence. Ghosty, the governor, the guards, and the onlookers watched in stunned silence. It changed. Suddenly, the red wall was no longer just red. Now, there were hundreds of laughing faces in it. The faces moved across the red domain, laughing the entire time. The next moment, everyone could see bloody hands forming in the red domain, which were clawing at the barrier. It became an elder. Ghosty shouted in shock. Impossible. Callum shouted from behind him. There are no more people in there. The only things in there are specters. At that moment, Ghosty's eyes widened in realization. Specters? Specters, he shouted. Then he turned to Callum. Have you ever tried feeding a specter to it? Callum blinked in shock. No, of course not. Many things were going through Ghosty's mind. He had a hypothesis that all ways in which specters could gain power were intrinsically related to human suffering. In his hypothesis, specters were the manifestation of human suffering, yet they also represented prosperity since manufacturers could suppress them and become more powerful thanks to them. So, isn't it possible that killing specters can also be considered causing suffering to humanity? Ghosty thought. The Crimson Sea's advance in power, the fact that only specters were left in the building, the fact that no specter had tried to escape through the entrances. It can gain power by consuming specters. Ghosty shouted at the governor. It consumed all the specters in the building, which is how it became so powerful. The governor narrowed his eyes. At least, that meant that the Crimson Sea was done growing for now. The governor continued suppressing the Crimson Sea, but then something shocking happened. The Crimson Sea was vanishing. The ceiling of the hallways was revealed as the water level lowered. During this entire time, the faces just kept laughing. When the governor saw that, he felt like his heart had stopped. No. The water level quickly sunk to the bottom and the water receded further into the building. The governor rapidly ran after the water and followed it, and when he entered a room on the lowest part of the building, he saw something terrifying. A hole. A huge hole. The Crimson Sea had entered the sewers. Meanwhile, on the border between the outer city and the dregs, someone clothed in a Zephix extractor uniform was looking with shock at the dregs. It was Nick, who had already changed his appearance. What is that? Nick thought. Right now, Nick watched in shock as red mist started to come out of the rusty grates on the floor. All the people in the dregs looked with concern and worry as their surroundings were covered in red mist from a high building. Nick was watching as the dregs turned into a sea of red mist. Chapter 289. 289. On top of one of the big buildings, Nick looked at the dregs, which were slowly getting filled with red mist. What is this? Nick said to himself in shock. The people of the dregs looked with confusion and concern at the red mist. They had never seen anything like this before. Was this some kind of new thing the city was doing? Ah, it burns, a 6-year-old child shouted as it scratched its arm. When the child scratched its arm, a red paste seemed to appear on top of its arm. Everyone looked over at the child and its bones sticking out from beneath the red paste that had once been its blood, skin, and muscles. The next moment, everyone else started to feel a burning sensation which spread all across their bodies. Then it started. The hair of all the people started to get thinner and several strands fell down. Nails were getting discolored, clothing was turning black and becoming thinner, shoes were starting to smoke, skin was turning red, eyes were turning red. AAHHHH. The screaming began, panic, terror. Thousands of people were running around in horror as they tried to escape from the red mist. Some of them were climbing up buildings, some of them entered buildings, some of them hid behind other people. Some were jumping into piles of rubble, many were running towards the inner city, many more were running towards the city's exit. Wailing filled the city. One man was running away in a panic and accidentally collided with a malnourished boy. Splash. The boy's body split into clumps of flesh, covering the man, who just stopped running in shock and horror. Mommy. It hurts. Help me. Children were screaming as their mothers covered them with their bodies. One of the mothers hugged her daughter tightly. "It's going to be dash." She looked at her crying daughter but couldn't continue speaking. Her daughter's cheeks had holes in them, and her mother could see her daughter's molars through the holes. "Mommy, I'm sorry, it hurts," the daughter cried. The mother watched in horror as the child's fingers were separating from her hands. The skin on her face was vanishing. Her eyes were filling with blood. "Mommy," the daughter cried before her jaw fell from her skull. Her cries became incomprehensible. The mother hugged her daughter tighter, but she felt almost no resistance. Her daughter was turning into a viscous red liquid of blood, meat, skin, and bones. In the end, the mother could only embrace a bloody stain of the outline of her daughter. She only looked down in disbelief. Her own skin was turning red, and she started to bleed all over her body. Her vision became blurrier and blurrier as the indescribable sensation of burning reached deeper and deeper into her being. At least the family wasn't separated for long. The streets were covered in a viscous red film, which was slowly dripping into the sewers. The middle of the dregs had become silent. The buildings and streets had been stained in red, complementing the spots of rust. Meanwhile, things were very different for the edge of the dregs. Crimson Fungus City was surrounded by extremely tall walls, and a great number of people were trying to scale them. Luckily, the sewers were in the form of a lake beneath the city, which meant that the edge of the city represented its shores. The very edge didn't have metallic grates and plates as flooring but actual stone and dirt. A couple of meters near the walls was free of the red mist, and all the people who had fled found shelter there. Boom! The sound of a humongous explosion thundered through the city, but the people near the walls didn't care. Many of the people were trying to climb up the walls, but it was impossible. The walls were made of extremely smooth steel, and there was no way to climb them. They were trapped like insects in a glass jar. Other people were trying to break through the doors leading into the insides of the walls, but there was no way to break them open. Nearly 1,000 people were banging on the city walls. All of them were begging, pleading, and shouting. Some lucky ones were uninjured. Many of them were in various states of decay. Some were missing limbs. Some didn't have any skin on their face anymore. Some were trying to keep their organs in their torso. People were climbing over each other. Children and weak people got trampled to death on top of the walls. The guards were nearly as nervous. What were they supposed to do? They were not allowed to open the doors, but the people were dying. Was it safe for the guards? Many of the guards had already jumped over the wall into the outside world. Some of the guards tried to reason with the mass of people, trying to calm them down. One guard even opened one of the doors for the people. Sadly, only about 10 of people could enter through that door. The others couldn't reach this location due to the red mist. Boom! The distant sounds of powerful explosions continued. CRRRK. The people on the edges of the walls heard the sound of a lot of metal straining under stress and creaking, and then many of the buildings began to shake. Bang! 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 The buildings broke apart and the streets collapsed. The people watched as the place they had called home collapsed into the sewers. Surprisingly, the debris fell for over 50 meters before touching anything. Had the sewers always been this far away from the city? Yet, before anyone could even think about this, they were confronted with an image of what could only be called hell. A swirling red mass. Over 50 meters lower than the ground was a swirling mass of liquid red faces. They were smiling. They were laughing. Arms over 20 meters long, stretched out from the swirling red mass, trying to claw at the survivors. Thousands of arms, millions of faces. The red mass of faces illuminated the darkness of the sewers. Viscous red liquid was falling from the parts of the floor that still held. The people wouldn't forget this image for their entire lives, however short they might be. Chapter 290. 290a. A mass of people was shouting in fear as the floor beneath them quaked intensely. While one part of the dregs had fled to the walls, the other part had fled towards the outer city. The red mist came through the grates and holes in the ground, and the outer city barely had any holes. The only holes were the toilets, and not much red mist could get through there. On the edge between the dregs and the outer city was a wall of red mist that was rising upward. From time to time, red faces seemed to appear in the mist, but they were not nearly as numerous as the red faces in the Crimson Sea itself. Boom! The floor shook again, and the people ran closer to the inner city. The Crimson Sea exploded upward, its liquid splashing against the floor of the inner city. The governor was surrounded by a halo of fire, and the spear in his hand was rotating rapidly, leaving behind a trail of fire. The liquid that was about to hit the floor of the outer city was burned away as a humongous beam of light swept past it. Above the governor was Arya Light, the chief Zephix extractor of Kugelblitz, and right now, her entire body was shining like the sun itself. Her eyes were completely white, and she waved a very wide but flat sword from side to side. The sword almost looked like a white fan whenever she moved her sword from side to side. A domain of white light extended into the distance, turning the red liquid into red steam. There were 3 more people flying through the air below the city. One of them was protecting the enormous shining pillar that supported the megastructure. The other 2 were getting rid of the majority of hands and red mist. All 5 heroes of the city were working together to protect it. The governor pulled his spear back and threw it towards the endless Red Sea. Boom. Another explosion occurred and the water exploded outward, yet at the same time, the water around the location seemed to sink further. The governor was destroying the floor beneath the sewers. He still remembered when Crimson Fungus City had been established. Back then, he had only been a veteran. Aegis had found the ruins of an ancient civilization in a round crater. The buildings were made of chrome-like metal, and the technology the city ran on was so advanced that Aegis could barely discern a little bit of how it worked. For a long time, Aegis researched the ruins. Apparently, from what the governor had heard, there were even more ruins below the visible ruins. Shockingly, these ruins were completely different from the ruins on the surface. Different architecture, different materials, different technology, and there were even more ruins below these ruins. All the different layers of the ruins were separated by a massive wall, which made the ruins deeper down almost impossible to access. Eventually, Aegis established Crimson Fungus City, aside from being a haven for humanity. Crimson Fungus City was also supposed to investigate the ruins. The ruins on the surface were not very important since these kinds of ruins were everywhere across the world, but the ruins below these ones were of quite some importance since those were rare. And the ones below those were even rarer, yet the only way to access the deeper ruins was the secret elevator in the middle of the megastructure. That was until now. The governor used all his power to destroy the floor of the highest level of ruins. He couldn't give less of a shit about the secrets of past civilizations when his people were dying in the thousands. The Crimson Sea advanced more and more in power as the red liquid comprised of former humans flowed down. Its arms extended more and more towards the sky. Because of that, the governor had decided to destroy the floor of the ruin. He had destroyed the floor in many places, and the Crimson Sea was sinking further and further. The laughing faces seemed to mock him endlessly as he kept attacking. Each attack created humongous explosions and shook the entire foundation of the city. Luckily, the megastructure was on top of the biggest structure of the ruins. The materials of the ruins on the highest layer were so hard that they could only be damaged by powerful veterans, while such materials weren't unconventional. It was almost unheard of to have an entire city made out of them. Even more surprising was that the materials of the ruins below these were even harder. And most shocking of all was that these materials hadn't been produced with Zephix. Aegis had no idea how such powerful materials could be created without the use of Zephix. Luckily, this meant that the megastructure was extremely stable. Its foundation was even more robust than itself. And the foundation of this foundation was even harder. CRR. The people on the edge of the outer city ran towards the inner city as the floor and building began to creak and crack. As the governor destroyed more and more of the ruins, more and more foundations supporting the outer city were destroyed. The further away one was from the inner city, the shakier and riskier things got. Some minutes later, the true appearance of Crimson Fungus City was unveiled. When looking at it from a distance, one could see the megastructure, which had the form of an elliptical pyramid. In a way, it looked like a spearhead. Below the megastructure was an amalgamation of dense, chrome-like materials that had been compressed into a round cylinder. This foundation was supporting the megastructure. More and more chrome-like buildings were unveiled as the Crimson Sea sunk through enormous holes in the ruins. Parts of the outer city were collapsing, falling into the ruins that were slowly revealed, and amongst these parts was a huge building. Dark Dream. The metal under the building shook and cracked, and then it broke. The building started to fall.